What's up, D3 Nation? Thanks so much for tuning in. We have a stacked show, episode, whatever you want to call it here. D3 Podcast Boys are taking on their stab at a little bit of a D3 show here, so we appreciate everybody for tuning in. And it was a crazy, crazy weekend in the D3 world. We had a ton of action. Obviously, by virtue of the back-to-back format, you know that it was going to be loaded from start to finish, but I think it gave us even more than what we were expecting. Let's get into it. You got anything to kick us off here? Any opening thoughts there, big dog?
Yeah, what a weekend. I mean, it was awesome. I thought, there were a lot of scores Saturday were, kind of predicted. There's a couple upsets here or there, some tight ones rather or not. But then Sunday, just a wild day. You had a few upsets, some hosts losing and whatnot. So excited to get into it here with you.
Yeah, and Sunday is where we'll spend the bulk of our time here, but we got to at least set the stage a little bit. Two bracket-based upsets, and neither matchup goes down as something that I would say is like, upsets by Team A beating Team B, but upsets by virtue of the fact that like one of the teams had to be a higher seed and one of the teams had to be a lower seed because we're talking about bracket play. And so those two games are Lynchburg with a win over Stevenson and St. John Fisher with a win over OWU, and I'll let you guide us. Where do you want to go first?
All right, yeah, let's go start with the Lynchburg-Stevenson game here, with Lynchburg avenging that Mustang Classic loss from back in March.
Definitely fine place to start, and the biggest thing about this one, I think Riley Hastings just showed up and was spectacular, right? Like, big-time players step up at this point in the season. He had 8 points on it, 3 goals, 5 assists, and he did a lot of damage from all over the field. Like, I went back through and watched all of the Lynchburg goals in a row, and the number of different plays he makes from different spots on the field, like, he's just everywhere. And, again, I think that he did a really nice job of just, like, sensing those Stevenson slides when they were coming. And I don't think that the Stevenson defensive effort was the best thing that, they put out this season. And you mentioned that loss back in March. And I just think that over the course of time, like, a lot of these teams change a ton, right? I don't think that Dickinson at that point was great, and they're still sitting here as one of the 8 teams left in it. Mid-season, I don't know that St. John Fisher was a team that we would have put a ton of stock in, and then that leads us as a great transition into the other version of this game, which was a St. John Fisher 17-16 win over OWU. It has to be, pretty proud of what they did this season. It was one of the best seasons that they've had in a long time, definitely since I've been doing coverage. I'd venture to say in maybe like a decade, but don't quote me on that. And this game was incredible. It's tied 9 times throughout it. A bunch of just like awesome, spectacular like individual efforts, and so really impressed over the course of that one with a handful of guys. And just to kind of shout some of those guys out, first of all, you had I think it was 14 total guys in the box score, so really impressive from that aspect of things. Then Brady Mason was kind of the guy that stirred the drink for him with 3 goals and an assist. With 4 points, and then you had a ton of just like I said, a ton of multi-goal performances and 14 guys chipping in, and so that was one that St. John Fisher was happy to get, and bought him 24 more hours.
Yeah, a lot of fun there. And then there's 3 additional 1-goal games on that day there. One from a big one there. Dickinson-Denison was an 8-7 OT game. St. Lawrence Middlebury 10-9 game, which was an absolute classic. Love that one. And then Amherst 12, Endicott 11 as well. So some tight ones there. Anyone you want to highlight?
Yeah, I'll quickly run through kind of just 3 points. I thought for Dickinson, obviously Luke Whalen, we're going to touch on him again because he scores the game winner on Sunday night as well. But just pretty much solidifies himself as a Dickinson legend after a 48-hour span. And then for St. Lawrence and Middlebury, another really tight 1-goal game. They played a 7-6 game in the regular season. Now in the postseason, they play to a 10-9 game. And this is one that's tough to swallow if you're Middlebury, just because the game winner is off of, they played pretty good defense, and then it's a loose ball on the crease as a result of said pretty good defense. And Bobby Wells scoops and scores. It's his 3rd of the game. And they, continue dancing for at least, like we said, 24 more hours. And then Amherst Endicott was one that was really tight all the way through, besides a 4-1 opening first quarter from Amherst. So outside of just that opening blitz was, a really, really tightly contested game. Gets tied a couple times, including going into the 4th quarter at 10-10. So, just all around, all 3 of those games were, probably the ones that were the tightest and the closest, with that Dickinson-Denison game going to overtime and huge ripple effects as Dickinson, goes and knocks off Salisbury the next night, also in overtime. The other guys end up, it was a situation where perhaps they just expended too much. Like St. Lawrence comes out against Tufts the next day. They go down 5-0 right away to them in the first quarter. And then similarly, Bowdoin takes a 10-0 lead into the half against Amherst. So just a lot goes into that first day, and then you have 24 hours to rest, prep, recover, and get right. And in those situations, it just it's a tall task.
Yep, couldn't agree more. And some big winners Saturday. We got those winners advancing to Sunday, and Sunday certainly didn't disappoint. Dan, I know you classify these games in some buckets here. So what are some buckets that you have for the Sunday games, and tell me where you got those.
Yeah, so you can take all 8 games, and what I did is kind of classified them as 3 different buckets, one being dominant wins, one as non-hosts, right? So we had 4 non-hosts advance, 4 hosts go down. Half of our hosts are no longer in the tournament, which, is something that we wouldn't have been shocked to see a couple of them go down, but for that many to go and for Salisbury to be one of them, I think is absolutely shocking. Mm-hmm. And then the third bucket is just RIT Tufts don't really lose. So they get their own bucket of themselves, and we're calling that bucket the collision course. So that potentially, there's some teams that have something to say about that for sure, but that potentially is the course that we're on, which is a RIT meeting Tufts again in the national championship. So with all that said, let's get into some of these, and I'll let you pick which bucket we're starting in.
Yeah, let's start with the dominant wins, and let's go Bowdoin Amherst, because that was quite the dominant performance there, especially in the first half.
Yeah, I don't have much to add to it. They just jumped right on them. We did say to look out for this one in the last pod that we did, just knowing that in the regular season, like, Amherst beat Bowdoin. And then by the time we got to this phase in the season, we were just like writing this off as if it was a foregone conclusion, and they were going to be up 10-0 at the half and go up 12-0 total. And those two things did happen. I don't know why we knew it so much. I wasn't on the boat that I was so confident that it was going to happen. You seemed to be, and the internet seemed to be. But, they were certainly right. So just kind of come out and, really just like leave no doubt about it. And that was one where you had Casey Ryan go for 7 assists on the day. Jason Locke had 4 goals and 2 assists. Huck Trafton with 3 goals, 2 assists. Cormac Walsh with 3 goals, Patrick Fitzgerald with 4 goals. So a ton of guys doing a ton of work. And then Robert Hobbs' 12 saves was enough to push him into first all-time in Bowdoin history. So shout out to Robert Hobbs.
Yeah, 900 plus saves and counting. That's pretty darn cool. So shout out Hobbs there. That's awesome. Another dominant win I think was very, very dominant there was Christopher Newport Lynchburg, which very similar position. Christopher Newport goes up big early, and Lynchburg never really has a chance to battle back in it.
Yeah, I mean, this was a total blitz, right? Like, we mentioned the Lynchburg kind of run, and I don't know that we really dove into that a ton, so I'll hit that really quick. And I think that one of the aspects of that game that was important was just a 2-minute phase where Lynchburg scores a goal, Riley Hastings scores a goal, just within the flow of a 6-on-6 set, and then Stevenson gets the ball, they go down, they have their set, and Parker Seeley goes down in transition, drops his shoulder, big time just flex on your opponent type of shoulder drop and stick it. And then off the next possession, Riley Hastings has the ball again, goes one-on-one, has just barely a step, gets the defender on his back just enough to close it off, goes to the one hand so that he can get a little bit of extra angle, and it's just an awesome take. So they score on that. And there's a ton of energy now. They have a 6-7 goal lead. And then off of that, the very following face-off guy goes forward and scores. And the bench erupts. And I thought that at that point, that was just kind of they could have called the game right there at that point.
Yeah.
And then I make that point because it was very much so Lynchburg ends up on the opposite side of that run in the on Sunday, and CNU goes on a 12-goal run. Their attack blows up for 20 points as a group, and just a really impressive display of offense there. Really on the weekend for CNU, but kind of crazy that Grove City gave them a better game than Lynchburg did.
Yeah, not too surprising, though, with my signed Danny Stone jersey in the background here.
It's such an incredible element of your newly established background.
Yeah, I'm upgrading here a little bit.
And just to harp on one more thing, I think Kevin Miller's had just an unbelievable season, like bona fide lock, first team All-American. He had 2 goals and 6 assists against Lynchburg. He's at 110 points on the season. He has had 78 assists and counting. Just like crazy numbers. And we knew that he was skilled. We knew that he was a good player. We knew that he was going to be able to fit within offense. I don't think that we knew that he was going to be as good of a quarterback for them as he's been. And 78 assists is just wowing.
Yeah, very much so. All right, let's keep it moving to the advancing non-hosts, which we had 2 big ones. So we'll start with the biggest one of the night. We'll go Dickinson 11, Salisbury 10, and OT. This was an insane instant classic thriller, Dan.
Yeah, instant classic is right in the sense that like it's another situation where it's a tight game in the first half. Salisbury takes a 6-4 lead into the half, and I remember thinking to myself like, a couple adjustments here and there. Salisbury comes out, probably goes on a run in the third quarter, and does what they do. And it was total opposite. Dickinson did that. Dickinson goes into the half, figures a couple things out, talks through it, comes out, goes on a 4-goal run of their own, holds them scoreless, goes into the fourth with the 7-6 lead, and then Salisbury battles back, right? Salisbury, again, does what they do, battles back, and do all the work to even tie it up and get it, to a point where, like, the pressure at that point had to be mounting in terms of, like, what Dickinson was feeling, right? Salisbury had that pressure, felt it when they were down, but then your back gets against the wall, you start to stack some momentum, you get a few plays going your way, you do all the work to battle back, and I feel like once you get back to that situation, like, the odds that the team that has that momentum at that point is on that run, the home team, the higher seed, undefeated, 20-0, all that jazz, right? Like, you think that they just have enough momentum to pull it out. It's Salisbury. They're gonna win the game, right? Then, even once you get into overtime, like, that sense of it's Salisbury, they're going to win, continues because they win the first face-off. And now Dickinson, they're going to have to make a stop. They've been pretty good on that side of the ball, so you're not shocked that they get a stop, right? Or you wouldn't be shocked if they were too. Salisbury defensively just is pretty unique in how strong and how willingly they are going to hold their matchups. And so for Dickinson, it was just like ISO after ISO, send a pick, ISO after ISO, send a pick, until somebody did enough to win a step and get a matchup. And in that situation, it was Luke Whalen for the second night in a row. And Jeremiah Stafford, in a bad spot, goes over the head. And I don't know, right? Like, time and place for doing all of that. And I think in overtime around GLE is the very worst time to potentially go fishing and, go for one of those types of over-the-head tracks. So, an unfortunate, heartbreaking overtime loss if you're a Siegel fan. An exciting, exhilarating win if you are a Dickinson fan.
Tough one for the Gauls as the Red Devils move on, and then we also had Cortland taking down York 10-6. Definitely tough to see our boys go down. Dan, do you have any statistical shout-outs in this one?
I'll let you hit some of the statistical shout-outs there for the Red Dragons. And what I'll say here in this one is, I feel like, and really you could say this in every game, but I feel like, come tournament time, every game kind of hinges on a few different plays here and there. If you end up on the right side of them or you end up on the wrong side of them, it could dictate everything. And I feel like in this game, like, for whatever reason, those plays were just much more clearly defined. And so one of them that very evidently comes to mind is the end of the first quarter. York gets a good look, cross-crease pass, and what could have been a dunk ends up a Travis Wagner pipe-to-pipe save. The rebound goes to the sideline. Cortland wins the dive out, and then they score on the other end of it, and that's all late clock. So they get a late clock goal in that situation, and it stems from a great save from Wagner getting pipe to pipe. And it's not like, it's just an incredible sequence, right? Like, I'm going to go back and clip it. But York has 2 guys dive. Cortland has a guy dive. They just win the race by, just a hair. And then you had a couple of other situations where, a ride back here or there for Cortland, and you think that those are situations that, you could clean up if you were York. And then, similar to the first point I made with the Travis Wagner save, you have another one at the end of the third quarter where Wagner makes a save, spits it out, and now they get one in transition from the lefty. And then another just like heartbreaking sequence at the end of the third quarter. Cortland scores with 10 seconds left. Then they go to the face-off. They score again with 1 second left on the clock in the quarter, and that's comes from Joe Delaney, who scored his first goal of the season, and that's off of the wing and just kind of kamikaze low angle was. And it was a great game, and like I said, just kind of hinges on 3 or 4, maybe 5 different plays here or there that really come to define the outcome of the game because the weight of it resulted in goals.
Yep, well said. And a couple shout-outs here. Nick Stocker had a goal, 4 assists. Sam Rothman and Ryan Scanlon each hit for 2 goals and an assist there, as well as Sean Cavanaugh tallying a pair of goals, and 5 additional Red Dragons also tallying points. And then you also had Wagner with 12 saves going 67% on the day. So all in all, I think he was the big difference maker. He was really killing everything that York got when they were getting going. So props to Cortland. I think they're a really good team, and it's going to be a lot of fun to watch them in the next round.
All right, thank you for that statistical recap here. Next one up, we have Gettysburg with a 14-12 win over W&L. What do you think?
Yeah, so when the bracket was announced last Sunday, I know a lot of eyes shifted to this potential matchup, and I think this is the only one where the host school was playing a team that they had already lost to on home turf this past season. So I think that was a big sort of, what can happen here, and I think we saw what Gettysburg can do here, taking down Washington and Lee.
Yeah, I feel like that aspect that you mentioned is important, right? Like part of what some of the underdogs have to do is spend a little bit of time convincing themselves that they can win this game, and maybe less so once you get to the Sweet 16, like all 16 teams can really play and kind of have the belief that they can beat anybody on any given day. But there's at least that element kind of in the back of your head at times, right? And so for Gettysburg, that certainly wasn't an element. They had not only didn't need to convince themselves that they could do it, they already had done it. And then they show up and go, they show up and just kind of dominate right from the start. Go up 10-3, and they take that lead into the half, and then they're up 11-5 in the third, and then W&L makes, life resuscitating, I'll say, so to speak, like season resuscitating, so to speak, run to come back, and they make an effort that leads to a 6-1 third quarter, but it just wasn't enough over the course of 60 minutes to get it done. And chipping back from down 7, in the first half is always going to be a tough ask, right? No matter who you have facing off for you.
100%, yeah, because Spano was an absolute game changer, 19 for 27, also had 2 goals and tallied 14 ground balls total. So I was texting Ben Jones, fellow York guy, and I was telling him, I know this looks like a big deficit, but at any point in time, Washington and Lee can play make it take it with Tyler Spano, and that's ended up what happened, but just a little too late. Yeah,
absolutely, and he finished the season. I mean, he was on a tear from start to end. He took 425 draws all season, won 311 of them, so that's good for 73%. And he had 10 points with 6 goals and 4 assists. So just a really impressive season altogether. And then in general, right, we have Gettysburg moving on. Gettysburg moves on to see Tufts now, and a big aspect of that was freshman Jackson Barrel. He's had a great season, a really impressive freshman campaign. But once you get to May, you never really know if how that's going to translate, and if that composure that you saw in the regular season remains in May when things get really tight and pressure is at its highest. And he goes for 5 points on 4 goals and assists. So proves that he is able to perform when the pressure is mounting even in May.
Yep, that's good point there. And another team that produced when the lights were bright and the pressure was on, RPI, Joe and our guy Joe Perry. They beat up on Wesleyan 13-7. This was quite a dominant performance. I thought RPI was going to take this personally in my bracket. I picked it and everything, but I didn't think it would be this dominant, Dan.
Yeah, and they led all throughout it, and again, just a really impressive. I thought that the defense was particularly detailed and really dialed on that side of the ball, and they had a good game plan to be sure that they were getting under the ball and be sure that they were doing everything to kind of eliminate the threats and get Wesleyan out of their game plan a little bit and force them to do some things that they aren't used to doing. And then offensively, they did a nice job just in general withstanding a long, aggressive defense. And Wesleyan is always able to get deep in hands and does a good job of kind of, identifying threats. And so I thought from that perspective of things that it was a really impressive offensive performance. Really just a team performance all around. And then a huge edge that they get there is Angelo Venuto as well. And I know you have some stats there for that.
Yeah, Angelo Venuto, he knocked it out of the park, 19 for 25 with 11 ground balls. Also tallied a goal there, so definitely a dominant performance that made it sort of a make-it-take-it process there for RPI.
Yep, and I don't have a ton to add to that. CKG and Cola got drafted. I guess that's cool, but otherwise I think we keep it moving.
Yep, yeah, shout out him and John DeFazio, since we won't be talking about Salisbury anymore either, but both those guys go get a chance to hit the PLL whip snakes, so pretty cool stuff there.
Absolutely. All right, let's keep it moving. I think that does it for bucket number 2.
I think that takes us to our last bucket, which is the collision course bucket with RIT and Tufts, both on either side of the bracket. Seems like they have a good chance to try to make it back to the championship for another rematch here. So we'll hit on them a little bit quickly for Tufts as they go out 5-0 early. They get that quick run, and then from there it's a real battle back and forth, but I think that 5-0 hole was just a little too much for St. Lawrence to overcome.
Yeah, and I feel like after you come out and you go up 5-0, like game flow changes, and I don't know. I don't think I have a ton of like insight to add to that one. I haven't, of all of the games, I didn't digest that one a ton just because, like, to me, you go up 5-0 and then like the game flow changes enough that it's like I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe I will do the due diligence of going back to make sure I'm not missing anything crazy, but with that said, I didn't weight that matchup too much once I saw 5-0 first quarter and then kind of cruise to a win.
Yep, agreed there. But RIT, they made you sweat it out for a little bit there. That was a pretty good game as RIT held a 9-5 lead at half, but by the time the fourth quarter came, they saw it dwindle to 12-12. This was a pretty fun game, Dan.
And let me just hit one thing real quick. We're going to spend most of the time here, talking about RIT. They win, they move on, did enough to make the right plays. But I think Coach Dobbins and Fisher deserve a ton of credit. I think Coach Dobbins is one of the guys that, like, year after year, this team is peaking in May. And I think that that's a really strong quality of a coach. It proves a lot about, like, some of the stuff that you're going to hear us talk about with Coach Webby soon about just, like, identifying flaws early, being willing to address them, being willing to challenge yourself and get better over the course of the season. And, like, that not every team does that. So when the teams do, I think that that's a tribute that's worth, noting. And for St. John Fisher, they lost this game 19-4 in the regular season. And then this game is tied at 12, right? Like tied at 12 in the NCAA tournament. So really impressive from that just like general outlook of it. And, this is a team that year after year Coach Dobbins has peaking in May.
Yeah, really impressive stuff. So what really jumped out at you at the page on RIT there? Who led the scoring? Who do you think is the force to be reckoned with on that side?
Yeah, and I don't know that, like, scheme-wise or anything like that, like, that there's anything profound, nothing super different. RIT does what RIT does better than other teams do what they do. We said that on the last podcast, and I think that it, just continues to ring true more so than, other teams. They're just so unique between the way that they play their sub games, between the way that they play their 6-on-6 offense where everybody's above the goal, and, they do such a good job of pinching the pipes. And so just to kind of, continue and hit some individual shout-outs from this matchup, I thought I really was impressed with Cliff Gaston, always am, and he led the way with 7 points, 6 goals, and an assist. And then the guy that, like, you don't know when you roll out a bid where the production's going to come from in the midfield. But Chase Bruno really stepped up, and he had 4 goals and assists. Ian Dingo really stepped up. He had 4 assists. And then Ethan Harkins, another attackman, just 2 goals and 2 assists for 4 points. And so just really impressive all around from that offense. And like I said, in general, these are two teams that like we could see very much so on a collision course for Memorial Day.
Yep. And hey, I wouldn't hate it. That'd be a nice, fun rematch there.
Nobody would be shocked by it, right? Like a lot of people at the beginning of the year would have picked it as their national championship matchup hopeful. And, there's certainly some teams that will have a lot to say about that come next weekend. I think CNU Bowdoin is going to be an incredible matchup. And, the winner of that one may be in a good position to go and take it to Tufts in a way that they haven't seen in a while.
We'll be watching it, so make sure you're tuned into NCAA.com and follow along.
First and foremost, thanks so much for taking the time here. We know that, these days, especially after the back-to-backs, you have a lot on your plate. But we are thrilled to have you, especially on the heels of what was one of the most exciting wins of the weekend and of the season, as Dickinson takes down Salisbury 11-10 in overtime. And that was victory number 2 of the weekend, both of which coming in overtime fashion. So to kick things off, we need to know, what were the emotions like on Sunday night when you walk into the locker room? Luke Whalen had already scored 2 overtime goals, and now the boys are dancing for another week.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. It was amazing. I think particularly, and you guys saw me early in the year at the Mustang where we weren't very good, and we've come a long way. So I think the real joy and the gratitude we feel is just in that growth and in what we've done throughout this season to put ourselves in this position, and just like I'm sure everybody tells you, but just grateful now that we get another week together and just try to keep getting better.
Yeah, Coach, definitely. That's that. Once you get over to that second weekend, I feel like it's such like a weight off the shoulders. Like, wow, all right, we actually belong here. We can do this. That's quite the feeling. Love to hear that. So let's talk game plan for a second. You guys did something that 20 teams this season have failed to do, which is beat Salisbury there. What made this so special, and what's the what would you say is the identity of this team?
Yeah, great question. I think and that's something we've talked a lot about is our identity, and we weren't really clear with that early in the year when we struggled. And it's become just we're a gritty team. We work really hard, and we make a lot of mistakes, but we make up for it with effort and I think toughness. And our game plan for Salisbury, like Dickinson, was to really be us and do that at a really high level and for a full game. And so we got to win a lot of possessions, sometimes because we throw it away a lot on the offensive end. So we got to make up for that with a real hunger and fight for possession in every way that's measured. And then just our defense has been strong and consistently strong and pretty consistent with personnel. And so we really relied on those guys to set the tone for us and make some plays.
Coach, you set me up well to ask this question, and fortunately you made the point before I had to, which is that we saw you at the Mustang Classic, and we don't know that what the product that was on the field there is necessarily was going to get it done against Dickinson and Salisbury on consecutive nights. So what do you most attribute that development or change or evolution to?
I give a lot of credit to our senior leaders, and our senior class just won their 4th consecutive conference championship. So they know what it takes, and we kind of had to reinvent ourselves a little bit early on, but relied on those guys from their experience and having been through it, and many of them in big roles. So just we simplified things. We got back to some basic stuff. And again, just played so much harder and tried to compete and have a lot. We weren't having fun. We were tight and we're much looser now and having fun. I know these things sound so cliche, but it's true. And just bringing some joy back to it. And our practice has changed. We became much more productive and the intensity of practice went up, and it allowed us to prepare in a very different way.
Yeah, agreed there. It looks like you guys are having just much more fun out on the field. So that's great to see. 2 guys that have really exploded for me. I think you're getting great play in the net out of Rocco. So I wanted to shout that out there. But then Luke Whalen as well. He's been clutch in some big moments. Talk about him a little bit and what he's.
Yeah, I mean, scoring two game winners, two overtime goals back to back. Pretty special weekend for Luke. We're referring to him now as Luke Malin.
Yeah.
So he's been fantastic, and he's just such an even kind of keeled personality. I think you kind of saw from his lack of reaction after those goals, he wasn't quite sure what to do.
Yeah.
And that's just real steady. And in the Salisbury game, we had a timeout with that possession. We talked through something that we wanted to do, and that never works, and it didn't work on Sunday. So now we said, basically someone's got to make a play, and Luke's the guy, and did a terrific job. Just confident, aggressive, doesn't overthink things, and just plays with his head up and his hands ready. He's pretty good at finding the open guy if he doesn't have his own shot.
All right, Coach. And like we said, we were going to try and be as quick with your time as possible and get you right back to it. And I'm sure one of the things on your plate today is getting a good bit of RPI scout in. So what do you know about them already? What do you know about the Engineers?
I honestly don't know much about them yet. And that's all beginning right now.
Yeah.
The D3 coaching lifestyle, I spent my morning working on receipts and hotel plans and everything for this next weekend. Got that out of the way. Now I can dive into that. I do know, and it's pretty neat for me, they're well coached, and that's Scott Daglish, who played for me at Dickinson, 2007 graduate. And Scott and I have remained very close and talk often. And he's a terrific young coach and done an awesome job there. And it will be a really cool experience to play against him.
Absolutely. All right, Coach, thank you so much. We really appreciate you taking a few minutes to join us. And you picked a good time to get your first win over there. I'm sure you are aware of that fact, but how quickly did you become aware of it again?
About getting the first win at Salisbury?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I have tremendous respect for Jim Berkman, and have played against him from literally 30 years ago. When I was starting the program at Marymount, we were in the conference with them, and was never close or very competitive. But he's just been terrific as I kind of began my coaching career there, and the fact that this would be their first time since 1989 not to go to Elite Eight, that consistency just. It's overwhelming. I can't fathom that. It's an incredible testament to their program, and they're the standard. An honor to compete against them, and a lot of things got to go right. And there's certainly some skill involved, but a lot more. There's just some luck with that. They hit a lot of pipes, and we were there to make some plays at the end and get it done.
Yeah, we call that scared shooting. They knew that Rocco was going to gobble it up if it was on the frame.
I like that. Rocco's been his improvement has been fantastic. I certainly attribute that a lot to his change in terms of preparation, but he's also getting mentored by Chris Brandow, who was a terrific goalie for us and a super coach, just a great goalie coach and coach in general. But their connection that you develop over the course of the year has been special and really fun to see.
Yeah, that is awesome. That's really cool. All right, Coach, thank you so much for taking the time. We appreciate it, and good luck with the Engineers this weekend.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate what you're doing. Thanks.
Absolutely. Thank you. A ton of fun over the course of the weekend, and incoming this week we have a ton of additional D3 content. So if you like what you heard, please be sure to share it with a friend and keep an eye open for some content this week. Looking forward to what will be a really, really good slate as we have the Elite Eight and Final Four on our hands. And like we said, we're excited to be able to combine heads here and try and do something a little bit unique to recap the weekend that was the round of 32 and Sweet 16. If you like what you heard, share it with a friend, send it around, and let's help raise some of these numbers.
Love y'all.